Welcome everyone to this special episode on diabetes in Ramadan from the WHO Eastern Mediterranean region. My name is Matilda Bistrom. I work as technical officer here in the regional office, and today we will be discussing diabetes in Ramadan. This episode is dedicated to providing essential insights for individuals who are preparing, who are in the holy month of Ramadan, living with diabetes. So joining us today is Dr. Mohammed Hassani, who is a renowned expert in diabetes management. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for this important topic.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. Always a pleasure.
Would you like to introduce yourself a bit and also introduce what you're working on in this topic?
Sure. I'm a clinician, endocrinologist working in Dubai Health, Dubai Hospital. I'm also an academic working as a professor with Mohammed bin Rashid University. And for the last 20 years, I've been involved in diabetes and Ramadan guidelines and research. And we've established 11 years ago, Diabetes and Ramadan International Alliance, a voluntary group that is working hard across the globe to have better understanding for diabetes and Ramadan. Our final goal, obviously, is to make Ramadan safer for everyone with diabetes, whether they wish to fast or they do not wish to fast. And consequently, we've been doing huge number of research, educational activities, patient education programs, and subgroups working not just in our region, but in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in Middle East, in North America. I think the only area which we haven't really tapped into yet is South America.
That's great to hear, and a lot of good work going on. And you have been developing some guidelines as well, right, for how to work on this?
In 2005, we started the first guidelines. I was invited to take part with a very good group with the ADA in 2005 and 2010. And then we developed regional guidelines with Diabetes Canada or with British groups. And eventually, the last 5 years, we produced two guidelines, or actually more than 5 years, 2016 with the IDF, and then again repeated in 2021.
That's great, and I think a very important resource for everyone working with diabetes and people living with diabetes who choose to fast or not to fast in Ramadan. So I really appreciate that you are putting those guidelines out. I wonder if we should jump in a bit to the sort of discussions what people can think of in Ramadan. So for instance, when it comes to the changes of eating habits and fasting schedules, how can individuals with diabetes effectively manage their condition during this time?
Sure. Well, you've touched really here on two very crucial points. Ramadan means that the person's schedule changes. The sleeping time change because people need to wake up for the early morning meal, the suhoor, before dawn, to have their meal and to pray. And consequently, that change in sleeping pattern is important physiologically. Also, they stop eating at dawn time and restart eating at sunset. So that also change in food intake is also very important. Now, how does this apply to a person with diabetes? They are all very passionate to fast. The vast majority of them fast whether they have type 2 diabetes. And indeed, the majority, over 55%, also type 1 diabetes, wish to fast and do try to fast. So how can the treatment during Ramadan match the eating habits of not eating at all for 15 hours, 16 hours, depends on where you are globally. And then obviously for so many after the long fast, they end up having a big need. Indeed, because Ramadan is a social event, many people overindulge. So the fasting for 15, 16 hours is suddenly replaced with feasting for a few hours. So these sudden changes in need to be addressed. And obviously there is a lot of things that need to be dealt with before Ramadan to allow the person to have a safe Ramadan, whether they will fast or not.
But yeah, that's very important to think about, because it's true that it's not safe for everyone to fast, correct?
Very, very true. And that's why in the Islamic regulations, there is the very important verse from Quran: whoever is ill or on a journey is exempt. And that was repeated twice. So the question here when it comes to diabetes, who is ill? I might have diabetes when I've just been diagnosed and my doctor asked me to follow a healthy lifestyle. Someone else could be on 4 injections of insulin and even furthermore on dialysis. So they are all under the definition of ill, but how is the level of illness? And that's why we need, as healthcare professionals, to do this first exercise, which is quantifying for the risk of the individual. And we have developed a very objective tool, which I'm delighted to know that it is used globally. I have colleagues in the US, in Europe, of course, in the Gulf and Middle East and Asia and Africa that are doing it, where you log in on an app, or you can even print the items. So when you see a person with diabetes, that person goes well beyond what is the type of diabetes or what is the type of therapy I'm on. There's so many other factors. What is the nature of my job? How many hours I work? How frequent do I have low blood glucose levels, what we call hypos? How well is my control? What is my social background? The physicality of my job and the circumstances of my job? What is my cardiac or kidney status? How old am I and how physically able am I, physically and mentally as well? So all of these factors are put together in a risk calculator, and it comes with 3 grades: red, amber, or green. Red obviously means high risk, and that person is advised not to fast. Green is no medical reason not to fast. Amber, here you have a choice. You could take the license of not fasting if you wish to do so. And if you decide to fast, you need to have some advice from an expert, and equally understand that if problems arise, you have a religious and a scientific license not to fast.
All right. And it sounds like this is something that an individual cannot determine by themselves, but they would have to go to their general health practitioner to learn whether they can safely fast. True.
The individual might look into some of the parameters, but some of the aspects need a clinician to decide on, or at least to know some of the figures to be able to clinically make a decision on this. So it's a tool that I would use as a healthcare professional with the person with diabetes in front of me to express what is the level of risk. Now, obviously, we know that many people with high risk decide to go ahead and fast. And many of them do so with no issues. It's only about risk categorization and not about being definite. So consequently, many other aspects need to be addressed. The meal, the fluids, the medication timing and dose, how much should we eat? So lots of things that need to be addressed by the healthcare professional during the consultation time.
Okay, yeah, that's I think very helpful for everyone to consider while they're thinking about whether to fast or not to fast. What would you say are the primary health risks associated with fasting for individuals with diabetes?
Sure. Well, when we treat diabetes, we treat it with drugs that stimulate the pancreas to produce more insulin, or to make better use of that insulin. So usually the treatment is done in a way that we are going to have breakfast and lunch and dinner and maybe snacks in between. So the tablet or the injection doesn't understand that I will not be eating for 15, 16 hours or even longer. So going with low blood glucose level, scientifically what we call hypoglycemia, is a potential risk. Equally, some people, to be able to fast, cut down on their treatment doses or frequency. And sometimes the reduction is too high, and at the same time, they overindulge in the Ramadan food. So having the opposite of instead of having low glucose level, having very high glucose level. In particular, people who are very insulin deficient or insulin dependent, that could also lead to ketoacidosis, where the body would retain some of the harmful acids and ketones and cause serious illness. Finally, if I'm exposed to excessive heat and maybe humidity and not drinking any fluids at all, then dehydration is a possibility as well. So these are the four main big themes that we try to address to make sure that they do not happen, or if they happen, to detect them early and to try to stop them.
That's great, and that's also good for I think our listeners to be aware of. And you can look for these signs if you know your diabetes, if your diabetes is under control while you fast. Something that I understand people are wondering about is if it's allowed to measure blood glucose during Ramadan, and maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Indeed. I mean, this is a very important question, Matilda. Some people in some countries think that any blood that is expressed in the body during Ramadan could stop the fast or make the fast invalid. But definitely going to the lab for a blood sample to measure whatever the doctors require, or check the blood sugar levels as the people do from their finger during the day and during the night. Specifically, obviously, here we're talking about during the fasting hours. It is certainly recommended and certainly allowed and does not invalidate the fast at all.
But there could also be instances when you measure your blood glucose and you need to break your fast, right? Because it's not within the range it's supposed to be.
And this is crucial because in normal days, in non-Ramadan days, let's say that today is not Ramadan and I have diabetes and I feel low blood glucose level. The automatic response is, let's correct this. How do we correct this? By eating and drinking something that is sugary. So the process of stopping the low blood glucose level is not different whether I'm fasting or not. This is a serious condition that can affect the brain and can lead to serious damage. So anyone who have symptoms or have a figure that shows low blood glucose level need to stop the fast immediately. And immediately means immediately, not it's an hour time going to be the time to break the fast and I can wait for an hour. That would be extremely dangerous, playing with fire. And after all, why would the person do this? The person fasts for Allah, for God. And God give us the permission. In fact, God asked us in these circumstances to protect our health and not to put our health into jeopardy. So the person who would put the health into jeopardy by his own act would be doing the opposite of being a good Muslim.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And I think that's very important to keep in mind as well, as that if an individual finds themselves in this situation, that it is important to break the fast to maintain good health and not risk any complications, right? So I really appreciate that you elaborated on that as well.
I'd like to add one more point on this point. The breaking of the fast is not just for the low blood glucose levels, but for the sudden rise in blood sugar levels. Yeah. So assuming that my control is good and suddenly I see that my sugar levels are a bit too high, and we have put a figure for this of 300 milligrams or of 16 millimoles if people are using the millimoles. Why these figures? Because these figures are considered to be high enough to potentially trigger the acid, the ketones, the harmful ketones that we talk about in our body. So if that happens, I also need to break my fast because maybe it's a marker of something more sinister going on where I need to hydrate myself, need to maybe take my medication or consult with my healthcare professionals for an extra dose of my medication or so. And again, the person need to be cautious and to try to avoid putting their health into jeopardy.
Yeah, no, that's very important. So thank you for elaborating on that. Something that is also important for our health is, of course, maintaining exercise. And is there something that people living with diabetes particularly need to think about while they do exercise during fasting?
Well, Ramadan is not a month of sleeping and doing very little. While we advise people to avoid intensive exercise during the fasting hours, we also do not advocate just being too sedentary in our style during the month of Ramadan. I come from Alexandria, and the sporting clubs in Alexandria during the last 2 hours are packed with people walking, jogging, playing different types of sports. As long as it's not an intensive physical activity, that is quite acceptable, especially during the last hour or two, where at the end of the exercise, you're not too far from eating and drinking. If the person would like to sustain their intense physical activity that they used to do before Ramadan, or they want to initiate during Ramadan, by all means do so, but in the evening, after you had the opportunity to eat and drink, to make sure that you have enough to get you through, because that person, after all, is a person with diabetes, and perhaps their treatment could make them go with low blood glucose levels or dehydrated.
That's helpful advice. So it means really to do moderate exercise, especially if you're not used to doing high intensity exercise as well. I think that's also something that we can all keep in mind when it comes to exercise, to not introduce a new exercise regime when you're already at low energy, for instance, while fasting. So that would go for everyone, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
You feel light and make you feel that you want to do more. Yes, of course, maybe some will feel tired, but if someone feels energetic and they want to exercise, by all means do, but don't make it too intensive in the heat. Perhaps you can think of, and we should not forget the Taraweeh prayers. These are prayers that are done in the evening, and many people go ahead and do it. Now, it varies in duration. Some people it lasts for 15, 20 minutes, and in others could be an hour or so. So even though it's done during the eating hours, but it's also a physical activity, and people need to be prepared for this and to make sure that their blood glucose levels is acceptable for doing this on a daily basis.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And that also is adding a little bit of exercise into your daily life. So when it comes to breaking the fast, is there something you would advise people when it comes to food, particularly when you have diabetes?
We want the Ramadan meal to be designed in a way that would take into account that the person is fasting, that the person has diabetes. The Ramadan plate is divided into 4 quarters. A quarter for protein, a quarter for vegetables, a quarter for beans or salad, and a quarter for carbs. It would be nice to break the fast with maybe a date. Dates are rich in sugar, but with rich fibers, also rich in many minerals. So having a date is fine. Having 3 is okay. Having 5 or 7 is a bit too much. People tend to have the dates in odds number. So 1, 3, 5, or 7. So 1 or 3 of the small ones is okay. Some of the dates are nice and big and juicy. So 3 might be too much for a person with diabetes. A nice glass of water to rehydrate the system is perfect, or perhaps some milk. But sugary drinks, juices that are rich in sugar is better to be avoided. Excessive amount of carbs in the meal, excessive amount of fat and fried food is also not advisable. Some people sort of spend the evening after iftar having snacks. Avoiding salty snacks is also important, because then it would retain salt and will make the person thirsty the following day. Now that person could be thirsty because their blood sugar levels is a touch high. So in a person with diabetes, we don't want to have double reasons for being thirsty. One, because of excessive salt, and the other, because maybe of the sugar levels being a bit too high. Having suhoor as late as possible is essential. One, it is the custom or the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where to have as early iftar as possible and as late suhoor as possible. That's very important, because if we have suhoor pretty early, then we're prolonging the hours of fasting. In a person with diabetes, that is not advisable. Second, for that meal, we want food that we call food that lasts. Not rich in sugar, not rich in carbs, the opposite. Rich in protein and some fiber and some fat. So the likes of eggs and beans and cheese and vegetables are very, very good. Yogurts, but perhaps what we need to cut down on is sugary food and lots of carbs, like lots of bread or potatoes or rice.
Yeah, I think that's definitely difficult when you've been fasting all day. I can imagine that you're very hungry and you just want to eat what comes, your cravings. So it's really important, as you say, to take it a bit easy, maybe drink a big glass of water before you start eating, and also plan your meals, right? So that you have planned even before what you will eat, so it doesn't come as a surprise.
Correct.
Yeah. So now we've been going over a few topics that I think is very interesting. We've been talking about, first of all, the decision to fast or not to fast, and that should be a decision ideally made together with your clinician or your general practitioner. We have also been talking about the risks associated with fasting, whether it's okay to measure your blood during your blood glucose during fasting. We've also talked about exercise. We talked about what food we can think about. I wonder, on top of this, if there are any general misconceptions that you hear surrounding diabetes and Ramadan that you could debunk, apart from what we already talked about.
Well, there's plenty of them. The first misconception is that we've already discussed about the myth of the blood tests is not allowed within diabetes fast. In fact, it is allowed, and is allowed more frequent during Ramadan, specifically during the last 3 or 4 hours of the fasting, where the body is quite vulnerable for low blood glucose levels. And also after eating, because it can help to adjust either our behavior or our medication. If we overindulge today, and it's clear that my sugar levels is going high, maybe then tomorrow I will think of not doing so or adjust my treatment. The second myth is that people on insulin cannot fast. Many people on insulin can fast, provided that they consult their healthcare professionals for the right dose, for the right timing, and for the right type of insulin. Another myth is that age is a taboo. Very young people should not fast, very old people or older people should not fast. Age is a factor, and we need to factor for it. So of course, as we get older, our body could be more frail, could have more conditions, but not everybody is the same. So it's important to individualize the care, to look at the person as a person. I don't want to be, when I get to 70 years old, someone say to me, happy birthday, now you stop fasting. Now look into me, and maybe I need to stop fasting 10 years earlier, or maybe I can carry on dependent on my health condition. Equally, teenagers, specifically with type 1 diabetes, they probably have longer duration of diabetes and more healthier than an older person with type 1. So type 1 diabetes is a higher level of risk. For some, it is still possible to fast if certain circumstances are met. So the myth of type 1 is not to fast. Many are unable, but many are able, and we need to differentiate between one person and another. So basically what I'm trying to say is, any person with diabetes needs an assessment that will look into what we need to do. and how can we decide on this? Another, maybe a religious myth, is that if I don't fast, I will be devoid of all the good things of Ramadan. Not at all. In Islam, it's the intention. So if your intention is to fast, but your health and your doctor are advising you not to do, you get exactly the same reward while you're eating and drinking. And it's an opportunity for people to do more of their charity things. People give food if they're not able to fast. Now, assume that everybody is healthy and eating, but nobody then will give food in replacement. So it kind of balances itself out on a social level. So the less healthy person who is physically or financially able would give food for other people. I know that many people do anyhow, but certainly many are doing it because it is part of the obligation for them as the condition. If you're unable to fast, then you give food of your similar to your own food.
Yeah, and even I can attest to that, even though I don't practice Islam. Joining an iftar with friends, it's a wonderful experience. And so I'm sure that it's also possible to join that as a Muslim and not fasting if you have your health conditions that are not making you able to do that. And as you say, the social aspect and maybe even having a bit more energy to do other things during the day, to help your family, etc. That could also be a positive thing if you cannot fast because of your condition. So there are positive sides to it too, and you can also enjoy Ramadan and the festivities and the way I see it, all the beautiful lights and all that that the city is. I'm living in Cairo, right? So all the beautiful decorations in the city of Cairo for Ramadan, you can surely enjoy that as well. So that's a good point to bring up, I think. I wonder if there's anything else that we haven't really touched upon that you think is important to know.
Well, I think people also need to understand that their medication might need some adjustments. Some of the medication are very Ramadan friendly. They don't need adjustment of the dose. Obviously, people taking it once a day will take it once a day at iftar, or they're taking it twice a day will take it at iftar and suhoor. But for others, specifically those on insulin or taking a group of medications called sulfonylurea, they are at more risk of hypoglycemia, of low blood glucose levels. And these will need dose adjustment and timing adjustment of their medication. It's maybe not the right place here to be specific, but certainly the person with diabetes or the healthcare professional need to discuss with their person with diabetes their medication and give them the advice necessary to go through Ramadan and a few days after Ramadan as well, Eid as well, where suddenly we overindulge into beautiful sweets that are rich in carbs, rich in sugar, and rich in fat, which obviously could disrupt the sort of balance of blood glucose levels.
All right. I think these are really practical advice for people living with diabetes or people who might have someone in their family living with diabetes too, because I think it's also important to understand what our family members are going through as well. So I really appreciate that you've been elaborating on all these topics. I think with that, I'm happy to close the session. If you agree with me. So I hope that to all of you who've been tuning in to listening, that you have found this information valuable. And I just want to say, remember to prioritize your health and your well-being, especially if you're managing diabetes. And until next time, stay healthy and enjoy your Ramadan.